In every era of history, there have been people who rose up and were willing to resist. And that spirit that says, I am worthy of dignity, and I will not accept this kind of treatment for myself or my neighbor, that's the spirit of justice.
Hey there, it's Julie. Welcome to Uncomfy, a show about sticking with moments that challenge us. Now, you're probably wondering, why would anyone choose to be uncomfortable? We're wired to avoid it. But I know from personal experience, and you probably do too, that sometimes a little discomfort has benefits if we can manage to stay open and curious about it. And that is what we're here to explore. So let's get uncomfy. I'm joined by Jemar Tisby. He's an historian and New York Times bestselling author. His latest book, The Spirit of Justice, True Stories of Faith, Race, and Resistance, has been adapted into a really beautifully illustrated children's book, which is called I Am the Spirit of Justice. I am so pleased to have Dr. Tisby. Welcome. Thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So the spirit of justice is just such a poetic phrase. And the origin story is also really incredible. Would you tell us how you came to that spirit of justice phrase?
You know, sometimes as a historian, you get the opportunity to live through history. And that's what happened in December of 2017 at the grand opening of the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. This was a very important event for the state of Mississippi to acknowledge its racial history, especially around the civil rights movement. And they invited Myrlie Evers-Williams to speak. Now, folks may hear the name and be a little bit familiar because of her husband, Medgar Evers, who was killed in front of their home in June of 1963 in Jackson, Mississippi. Well, Myrlie Evers came back to Jackson and she went through the museum. And I didn't realize this till much later, but the museum has on display the actual rifle used to kill her husband. And so I can't imagine the emotions and the trauma that brought up. And yet she persevered through that tour and then gave a nationally televised speech to thousands and thousands of people. And then afterwards, I was at a small press conference and a journalist asked her, well, how do race relations now in the 21st century compare to what you experienced in the 1950s and 60s in the civil rights movement? And she said something very chilling. She said, I'm seeing things now that I hoped I'd never see again. She runs through this litany of racism, recent racism that she's seen. And then she says something perfectly understandable. She says, and I'm a little bit weary at this point, which is an understatement because she's in her mid 80s in 2017. And by the way, she's still alive today. So history's not that long ago. And then she says something I'll never forget. And it's part of what inspired this book. She said, but it's something about the spirit of justice. And then she made this analogy to a war horse that's been put out to pasture. And then it hears the bell, which she calls the bell of freedom. And then she said, the back becomes straight and you become stiff and you become determined all over again. And I was recording at that moment. And I'm so glad I did because I've never forgotten those words. And I've revisited them often as we pursue this struggle for racial justice. And we all get weary. And then I remember, there's something about the spirit of justice. And so that's what I wanted to write about.
Yeah. And if we could just rest on Myrlie Evers-Williams' story for a little more, because you actually go into some detail about what I think a lot of people, certainly I, didn't know about her, which is that she, like also Coretta Scott King, they were activists in their own right,
Absolutely.
Both before and after the martyrdom of their husbands. And so tell us just a little bit more about some of the moments where Myrlie Evers-Williams heard the call.
Absolutely.
And back straightened to the spirit of justice.
I'm so glad you bring it up because the Black women in the civil rights movement so seldom get the attention and the honor and the respect that they're due. Myrlie Evers is one of them. So from the very beginning, her husband, Medgar Evers, serves as the first field secretary of the NAACP. Well, that was a joint decision. Myrlie had to sign on to that because they were doing everything together. They were basically the only employees at the time and certainly the most involved. And it was very dangerous. So she had to make the choice to have a family, but to keep them in Mississippi and put them in harm's way, as we saw tragically, that was very real in the assassination of her husband. But she didn't stop there. So many years later, she actually, in the 1990s, the NAACP is floundering. It's got debt. It's lost a lot of respect and its reputation. Well, she comes back in as chair of the board, essentially, and rights the ship, helps to close the fundraising gap, pay off the debts, restore some of its national prominence. And so it's sort of a poetic kind of justice thing that, this organization that her husband got killed for serving, she comes back 30 years later and helps to right the ship, so to speak. But also, her husband's killer goes free for 30 years.
He's known. People, it was known who he was. It wasn't like it was mysterious.
It wasn't a mystery. It was not even a question. It was just a question. It was just an issue of an all-white racist jury finding the evidence and still ruling in favor and in racial solidarity with another white person. And so she perseveres through that until finally, in the 90s, he is convicted for murdering her husband. And I just can't imagine knowing who killed your spouse, knowing they're free, spending time with their family in ways that your spouse will never get to spend time, seeing his children grow up, spending time with his spouse, and then persevering through that finally until a conviction comes through.
I mean, I can't even imagine what she experienced during that time, but I could see a reason for her to sort of say, like, I can't keep reopening that wound. It's unjust and it's unfair, but I need to move on, and kind of dropping it, and to sort of keep being willing to go back to that and try to get another trial and get that conviction. It is really courageous.
It absolutely is. And that's precisely what is the core of the spirit of justice. So when you study history, it becomes very, unfortunately, routine to see injustice, to see evil. Like you come to almost expect the bad things. What is unexpected and what is remarkable is that in every era of history and in every sort of permutation of injustice, there have been people who rose up and were willing to resist. And that spirit that says, I am worthy of dignity, and I will not accept this kind of treatment for myself or my neighbor, that's the spirit of justice. That's what people like Myrlie Evers-Williams displayed. That's what the over 50 different people I profile in the book display. And I wrote it not just so that we would know that these courageous figures lived in history, but to know that the spirit of justice lives today and is in us to continue the struggle for justice right now.
How's it in you, Jemar Tisby?
Well, I believe in gifts of the Spirit, 2 Corinthians 7, and I think one of my gifts is teaching, and so that means being a historian, doing the research, putting it away that the church can absorb and access and utilize. And so right now, I'm trying to draw on the stories from our past to inspire and motivate and encourage us for the present day struggles for justice.
So aside from Myrlie Evers-Williams, is there a story that you've been reflecting on for strength quite a bit in the book recently?
There's so many great stories. I like the sort of hidden history, the stories that we may not be as familiar with. So one of them is Sister Thea Bowman. She grew up in Mississippi, a Black girl, and her parents sent her to the local Catholic school, which was sort of a mission school. And from a very, very early age, she was very dedicated to faith and spirituality. So she knew in high school she wanted to become a nun, a Catholic sister. And so she does. And she goes from rural Mississippi up to Wisconsin. She had never seen snow before, and she saw it the first morning, and she calls her mother excitedly, like, there's all this white stuff on the ground. This is great. And then it sticks around, and she's like, this is awful. She's not a northern Midwestern kind of person. And she goes on and she becomes a nun, and she becomes an educator, and she goes back to Mississippi and teaches in the schools there. She's also brilliant. She gets her PhD as well. But what is so remarkable about her is she speaks truth to power in such a loving way. So she's at this U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, which is almost entirely white, and it's exclusively men because Catholics only ordain male bishops, right? And so she's telling them basically that the Roman Catholic Church has treated Black Catholics like children. You have told us what to do, where to go, how to do it, and haven't allowed our own experience, our own culture to inform our faith and our practice. And she's telling them, get out of the way. We are children of God too. We have the Holy Spirit. We can lead in our communities, and we're best positioned to do so. We want to stay in communion with you, but we don't want to be subordinate to you. And so she's speaking these hard truths, but she's singing, she's smiling, she's resplendent, even though she's got cancer running through her body at the time, and she dies a untimely death at a very young age. But she's one of these people whose spirit, you just read about them, and their spirit almost leaps off the page to say, this was someone I would want to be around and learn from and be like.
And so why does Sister Thea Bowman's story resonate with you right now?
I think her ability to be very true to her culture and her people, while also navigating a system that's really not built for her. I mean, it's male led. It's predominantly white. In terms of geographic dispersal, there's less of Catholicism in the South where she was from. So all of these things stacked against it. She was able to work within the system. She was able to work with people, and yet she stayed true to her calling, true to the Black communities that she was serving. And I think by doing so, she really taught a lot of people about the expansiveness of God's kingdom and the different expressions that can take.
You have spent a lot of your academic career engaged in faith circles and writing books about the intersection of faith and justice and also race. And people may be familiar, if they're podcast listeners, if they've read your books, may be familiar with a bit of your backstory, that you converted to Christianity into a very white Christian tradition. Would you tell us about I imagine that was very uncomfy on a lot of fronts, to be like the only maybe Black face in a church meeting, and sort of how you grappled with that.
Absolutely. My testimony is I became a Christian through the ministry of a white evangelical youth group in the Midwest. And I'm friends to this day with some of the folks that I met there, including our youth pastor. So it was, authentic gospel and authentic conversion. And honestly, it was one of the first places I felt truly included. But to the extent I ever felt excluded or on the margins, it was because of race. And I hasten to say that what I experienced wasn't some sort of overt racism, people calling me a racial slur or something. It's not what they said, it's what they didn't say. It's not what they did, it's what they didn't do. It was as if racial realities disappeared at the church doors or the youth group doors, and those realities weren't part of what the gospel spoke to. So there was this kind of deafening silence there.
So what wasn't said? What wasn't done? What's an example?
Well, race was never mentioned. The cultural cues, whether it was the music or the illustrations in a sermon, were all coming from a very sort of monocultural lens. Now I'm a teenager. I don't have a sophisticated analysis of this. I just know, like, do they understand that my experience is a bit different than theirs? And if so, how does Jesus speak to that? How does Jesus minister in the midst of that? And so I was, without really being able to put words to it in high school, college, yearning to feel seen by my peers, feel seen by the leaders, and to feel seen by God. Because if you never hear about your experience from the pulpit or in the Bible study or in the theology books, you start to wonder, does it really matter? And so that's what I was wrestling with. But I got all the way up to the point of being ordained about to be ordained in a predominantly white denomination. Then come along things like, Black Lives Matter and all these videos and marches and things like that. And I, like many people across racial and ethnic spectrum, speak up for, justice in these situations. And then where you start to see that even though you may share the same pew, you don't say share the same perspective. And so that was really painful to hear people who I had worshipped with, prayed with, broken bread with, uh, feel like they start to turn on me and essentially say that, you know, my stances for justice weren't really Christian. They were outside the gospel. They were too liberal, whatever the label was, right? And so this denomination that I was about to be ordained in, had been an intern at a church, and all of these things, had gone to seminary for. Um, I don't know if I was sort of shown the door or if I walked out, a combination of both. But for me, the uncomfortable part was choosing to venture forth from a community that had been so familiar for so long. It's hard. Like, thank God I didn't leave the faith. My faith is stronger than ever. But it had to shift, and it had to change, and the community had to change. And so I found Christian community among other people who may not share the same four walls of a congregation, but people who are like-minded about pursuing justice and trying to love their neighbor well, and understanding that Jesus in Luke chapter 4 proclaims that he's come to set the oppressed free and liberate the captive. And that's the kind of community that has really encouraged me and kept me walking.
I can imagine that there were maybe members of the congregation that you left, or the church community that you left, that when they've heard your story, they're like, darn, I wish we could have, like, I wish I could have known, like, if I could have done something, like, what could, if you could offer a little insight as to what could have helped you to feel seen and understood. Maybe not necessarily everyone was going to be on board with all of your views, right? But
Mm-hmm.
is there a way? How can faith communities allow for the disagreement and a level of discomfort within that, but also create a place where people of all races and sort of political leanings, I guess, can belong together?
I really think it's a matter of truth. So often throughout history, we find that when there's compromise and complicity with injustice, which is an important point, right? It's not always the people doing the most overt things. Like in the case of racism, it's not always the case of the people who are tying the noose or burning the cross or putting on the white robe and hood. That's a relatively small number of people numerically, right? A much bigger group of people are the ones who aren't actively doing those things, but who let them happen through their silence. And so often what triggers the silence is fear. It's fear of what people will say. It's fear of being ostracized from the community, experiencing things like I experienced. And so what would have helped is people's commitment to the truth being stronger than their fear of people, right? Bible calls it the fear of man. In the final chapter of the book, The Spirit of Justice, I identify a few virtues. One of those virtues, of course, is courage. Whether the actions these folks I profile took were big or small, the common denominator was they had to push through fear, or better yet, walk alongside fear into the path that truth was leading them. So what I would have loved to see in those church settings was people just standing beside me and saying, hey, he's got a point. Or, hey, maybe we should look at our practice and understand that it's coming from a context, which doesn't mean it's wrong, but there are broader contexts to consider. Or also, maybe we should look at our neighbors who are, say, seeing these videos and experiencing pain and sorrow and grief. And can we weep along with them? Can we not simply deny their pain or diminish it, but feel just as one part of the body hurts, so we all do? So that compassion there, which I think is founded in truth and following where truth leads us, but that also requires courage.
Jemar Tisby is an historian, a New York Times bestselling author. His latest book is The Spirit of Justice, True Stories of Faith, Race, and Resistance. It's also been adapted into just a beautifully illustrated children's book called I Am the Spirit of Justice. Dr. Tisby, I heard that it was your childhood best friend who did the illustrations in that children's book.
Yes. I met Malcolm Newsome in 5th grade, and we were attached at the hip. You couldn't say one of our names without saying the other. And we, went to Six Flags together, and we dreamed about the future together. Never did we dream we would be writing a book together. But when he grew up, he became a children's book author. And when the publisher says, "Hey, who can write this along with you?" I said, "I know just the person." So it was a blast writing with my childhood best friend.
What an incredible thing. The book is called I Am the Spirit of Justice. Jemar Tisby, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you.
And thank you for getting uncomfy with us today. I'd love to hear about a moment you've had recently where you leaned into discomfort just a little bit. Did it lead to some new understanding? What did you get out of it? Email uncomfy@byu.edu to join the conversation or connect with us on social media. And in the meantime, check out my other podcast, Top of Mind. It's a great companion listen to Uncomfy. Over on Top of Mind, we are tackling the toughest of topics. We're doing it in ways that will hopefully spark growth and empathy in us. Just search for Top of Mind with Julie Rose on your favorite podcast platform. Uncomfy is a BYU radio podcast. Samuel Benson produces it, and the team includes James Hoops and Sam Payne. Our theme music was composed by Kelsey Ney. I'm Julie Rose. Can't wait to get uncomfy with you again next week. One quick thing before you go. If you're looking for a podcast the whole family can enjoy, check out the new show Constant Wonder Kids. It takes stories from the BYU Radio original podcast Constant Wonder and transforms them so kids can join in on the adventure. Together, you can discover fascinating facts and true stories about amazing people doing incredible things in nature, like diving deep into the ocean to meet an unexpectedly friendly whale shark, or cheering for tiny athletes at the International Hedgehog, yeah, I said Hedgehog, Olympic Games. You can find Constant Wonder Kids on the BYU Radio app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.